one of the things that, you know, it harkens back to science class is when you have a problem, don't change 6 things, because if you've changed 6 things, you don't know which thing fixed it. So I encourage you to change one thing at a time. Did it make it better or worse? It made it worse. Okay, dial it back. Now let's try the opposite. So don't change too many things at the same time, so that you can kind of sort. After a while, it becomes second nature, but not initially. Some troubleshooting. So Amy was shocked to hear this, and she's an avid sewer. So I'm going to tell you a little known, never adhered to rule, which is the rule of thumb is you're only supposed to use a sewing needle in a machine for 2 hours. There isn't a self-respecting sewer on the planet that gives up on a needle after 2 hours. If it's still sewing, you use it till it dies, you use it till it's giving you a problem. That said, it is the weakest link in your chain. They are the most fragile item that has the most wear and tear, and they do need to have a very, very perfect point to them. So if your needle has a dull tip because you've used it too much, if it has even the slightest burr to it, or if it has a bend in it and you can barely even see the bend, or the bend is obvious, it needs to be changed. Also, you want to make sure that you're using the right needle for the right fabric. So there's fine needles, there's medium weight needles, and then there's heavyweight sewing needles. I like to use, I average about an 11, 12 when I'm using my needles, but on this big machine, I tend to use a really heavy duty needle because this has so much speed to it that I just would prefer to have a baseball bat versus a nice fine needle, because it goes so quickly that I need a heavier needle, because I'll break them more often because they are fragile. How do you know that your needle is worn out and it's had enough and it needs to be replaced? This will answer most of the questions that were submitted. If you have a dull, bent, or burred needle, it will usually present itself as a bird's nest on the back of the fabric. So you're stitching along and all of a sudden everything kind of clunks, and you open everything up and you realize that your bobbin thread has created this lovely ball beneath it, and you can't figure out why. It is not your tension. It's almost never tension. It's a dull needle or a bent needle or a bird needle. Trim away your bird's nest, double check, always restart your threading in your machine. So go through, rethread everything, because if any one of these things comes undone, which is common also, it'll present as a wonky stitch also, and it'll look like your tension is off, and your tension's not off, it's that it's not threaded properly. It jumped out for whatever reason from behind that little gooseneck or from behind this little tension piece back here. Any one of those things are off, and it's going to look like your tension is off. I guess your tension is off, but it's not actually off. It's that you're not threaded properly. So once you've done all that, you get the bird's nest again. Now it's time to change a needle. Try not to change it for the needle that you put back in the package from the last time. So typically, if I'm using a heavyweight needle in this machine and I switch to a fine needle, I'm not getting rid of that heavyweight needle. So I'll end up, in fact, here's the heavyweight needle I pulled out today. This is a great, huge needle. It's as dull as a baseball bat, but I fully intend to use this again. So, you know, you have to kind of look at what's your issue. So if it's balling up again, swap out your needle. So that said, it's almost never going to be a tension issue, but on the rare occasion that your bobbin case tension is off, in all the years I've been sewing, it only happened to one machine, and it was at the end of its life. And my husband, I was on borrowed time, and my husband was just trying to keep it together long enough for me to get one more project done. So that's how often it happens. It's really infrequent. Do not go inside these machines with screwdrivers like we did on the old machines years ago. We used to go in with a flathead screwdriver. We used to pull everything out, clean the dust out of it, put everything back together, screw it back together, put a couple drops of oil in there, and we were good to go. Nowadays, that's not the case. In these newer machines, They actually have timing in them like a car. So that when you pull out the bobbin case, which is it's the case that the bobbin actually sets into, there's timing in there. So that if you put it back in and you don't realize that you've touched the hand crank or you've messed with anything, you've thrown the timing off. And you can create a problem that didn't exist prior. So please don't open your bobbin cases. Any questions about any of that?
Thank you for the tip. I never realized the bird's nest was that kind of issue.
Yeah, I have to say, with that in mind, with all the customers that call me to do sewing machine service, I almost never get the sewing machine in. I get very few of them in because it's always a dull, bent, or broken needle or bird needle. And so, you know, I would rather have you know what the problem is, because even if you bring it in for service, after you've worked with that machine long enough, it's going to appear that the machine's broken again if you didn't realize that it's just the needle.
Is that, when you say bird's nest, do you include the, when you look at the underside, if there's just a lot of loops?
Yeah.
Is that sort of?
Yeah, and it'll not only will, so yes, you get the looping sometimes, and I think that's when you have a burr on the needle. So the difference is, you ever look down and you look at your bobbin thread and it looks like a crochet stitch?
Right.
Where it jumps back on itself? That's a dull needle.
Okay.
The other way a dull needle, bent burr needle manifests is skipped stitches. So if you're sewing along and it mysteriously starts skipping stitches, you know your pressure foot is proper, you know your tension, you've rethreaded it, everything else is fine. It's the needle.
Gotcha.
Anybody else?